Story 1. Buying groceries based on what you're missing from your pantry. I used to buy the same 2 to 3 ingredients that would make up my entire food supply for the week. I thank God every day I can stock up worry-free. Story 2. 1. Having a job. 2. Education. 3. Housing. 4. Earning money. 5. Free healthcare. 6. Free speech. 7. Owning guns. Clean water. 9. Electing your leaders. 10. Freedom of choice in how you live. Story 3. Practically everything considered the norm for middle-class America includes electricity, indoor plumbing, including running water, toilets, showers, and bonus points for hot water, internet, household appliances such as dishwashers, washers and dryers, and refrigerators, air conditioning, transportation. Many of these are considered necessities rather than luxuries. Story 4. Walking. There's so much freedom tied to it, and we take it for granted. I didn't even realize I did until my newly amputated dad called me while walking to the library and asked me what I was doing. When I told him I was walking to the library, he said, "You have no idea what I would do to be able to walk to the library right now." I tried to brush it off like having legs wasn't a big deal so he wouldn't feel so bad about his amputation, but that conversation plays often in my mind. Mostly when I miss my dad, who passed away 8 years ago, but it still feels like he just passed on. So yes, walking. You never know what you've got till it's gone. Story 5. Having unpaid domestic servants at home, known as wives and mothers, who perform work for you whenever you need it. Maybe people should be way nicer to those people. Story 6. Vegetables, fresh fruit, meat, and dairy products are widely available in the grocery store. A global disruption in supply chains will leave those shelves empty in less than 10 days. We are always 10 days away from basically empty supermarkets if disaster strikes. Story 7. Having access to all the information in the world and still choosing to be ignorant or apathetic to politics. I know I'm no fun, but neither is this reality. Story 8. Literacy. For much of human history, most people had no access to it. In most historical settings, education was expensive and primarily limited to the royalty, aristocracy, and the few others who could afford it. Sure, there were outliers, but this was overwhelmingly common in much of the world until the early 20th century. We now consider literacy to be a human right, or at least a child's right, which is wonderful, and I hope that this attitude, along with access to literacy, continues to expand. But until very recently, and even still today in much of the world, unfortunately, literacy has been a luxury limited to those who could afford it. Story 9. I love the history of pineapples and how they used to be considered a luxurious food that only the elite could afford. They threw parties with a pineapple as the main focus of the event, which is why many British noble symbols include pineapples. Story 10. Good mental health and decent parents who would have imparted it to you. Mental health affects everything. Social life, ability to study, no matter how smart you are, stress and anxiety, ability to stay physically healthy, and so on. It allows you to focus on whatever you're interested in and excel in it, rather than fighting yourself or escaping every day. Story 11. An actual house or apartment. Clean, running water. Reliable electricity. Air conditioning. Being healthy, or just having health care, and health care with deductibles and copays is not adequate health care. Story 12. Most things in our life, like being able to speak and see others on the other side of the globe, being able to drink fresh water anytime from the tap, and having fresh vegetables and fruits almost any time from the fridge or store, are remarkable. We have a computer in our hands, and we use it to chat about trivial things while most of us don't even realize how lucky we all are. A lot of us just keep creating non-existent problems. Instead of living in peace and trying to achieve more, some entities try to create more conflicts only to make more money. Story 13. A few months back, we had a main water line break in my neighborhood. It was only a couple of days, but we had no water available to our whole block. It really makes you realize what a luxury clean, drinkable running water is. To just turn a tap and have a hot shower, throw all the dishes in the dishwasher and press start, use the washroom and push the handle to flush everything away. Things that seem so normal to us are actually such a blessing. Story 14. A happy childhood. A home without domestic violence. A lifetime of good mental health. Paid vacation banked. Living in the country you want. Did not get laid off. A healthy libido. Living away from your parents. Story 15. Living rural. And this is not about the people but the quietness and nature. To be able to go out and be completely alone whenever you want. No light or sound pollution. And nature being your playground as a kid. I miss the space, and I don't even live in a city. Story 16. The most upvoted replies here assume the question was on a global basis. To be more useful, I would suggest answers really ought to be grouped by first world and global standards. First world luxury taken for granted. Childcare support, particularly in places that fully fund public services for all ages like France. People have no clue how burdensome childcare can be in the wealthy world, or in countries or jobs with very supportive parental leave policies. Cheap energy. Under carbon policies, electricity and fuel costs are increasing much faster than the general trends of the prior 60 or so years. Hence things like farmer strikes. The costs and burden of carbon policies haven't been borne equally in the first world. Non-commoditized prepared food. This varies by country and culture, but dining out regularly in a made-from-scratch setting is still generally a luxury. Global standards. Water and especially hot water. Rule of law. Most places have little procedural certainty for non-elites and significant informal systems of rights or economic regulation. In the worst places, this means substantial violence, especially to women. In better places, it means bribes and lots of private services for the wealthy. Critics of the U.S. health system may not appreciate that public health care in Cuba and China is inadequate, and people who can afford the luxury go 100% private, even in Canada. Reliable electricity. Story 17. At this point, it's almost safe to say anything an American says is a human or natural right. Healthcare, a house, minimum wage above the poverty line, and more. An accurate answer would be things like 1. Banks, including debit cards, automated teller machines, online banking. 2. Cars. 3. A week's worth of clothes for every season and weather type. 4. Smartphones. 5. Fifth-generation wireless internet. 6. Street lights. 7. Central air conditioning and heating. Video calling. 9. High-resolution cameras in your pocket. 10. Emergency services, including police, fire rescue, emergency medical technicians. 11. Music streaming. So much more. It's almost endless, the things we take for granted today. Story 18. Prepared frozen foods such as Stouffer lasagna. For centuries, foods were made by hand from scratch using recipes and techniques passed down for generations. Today, for around $10, you can just put a lasagna in the microwave for 15 minutes and feed your family. Additionally, making things from scratch will cost much less. We never had frozen meals growing up. It was too much money, according to my mom, who was a very good cook. It wasn't until I was in my 20s that I had a frozen meal. I was so disappointed. To me, frozen meals will always be an unnecessary and wasteful luxury. Story 19. Multiple vacations a year. When I was growing up, we took one vacation a year, and that was usually driving somewhere and staying with family or friends or in a Motel 6. A lot of people expect to take multiple expensive trips a year. Story 20. Consistent electricity is nothing short of a miracle. It is produced for all practical purposes at the same time you use it. There is essentially no backup storage. Story 21. Being able to buy groceries and not have to do the math in your head to see if you have enough. I wasn't homeless, but there was a time while living on my own when I could only afford $20 a week for food. Story 22. Having good health, dental, and vision insurance that is low cost for you and your family, with a low deductible, along with low copays and out-of-pocket costs. Story 23. Modern life. Smartphone, 32-inch television, high-speed internet, streaming services, gaming devices, anything you want brought to your door, bottled or filtered water. The list is close enough to call endless. Story 24. Driving. Having the health and financial stability to do it is a massive privilege. I have a cousin who cannot drive due to seizures, and it has a huge impact on her ability to get around and perform even the most simple tasks that many of us who drive take for granted. The United States does an extremely poor job of accounting for the mobility of people who cannot drive with its over-reliance on car infrastructure. Story 25. After traveling to almost 50 countries, many of them very poor, I would say most things are taken for granted in the Western world. Clean water, governments that provide basic needs, a working infrastructure, and not being under so much financial pressure that you literally sell your children, such as fathers pushing their daughters into prostitution because otherwise there is no food. The list goes on. However, that doesn't mean we should accept the heavy inequality we see today in the West as well. A poor person might be rich compared to a person in a poor country, but the person is still poor. What I am trying to say is, be grateful that you have a better life than others, but don't accept billionaires. They shouldn't exist. Story 26. Grocery stores. Ask someone from a former communist country how it was during communism. We take it for granted to get bananas and stuff for a few dollars. Story 27. Everything in modern life. Constant heated water in the tap. Warm houses. Car. Great education. Internet. Think about it. Even kings from 300 years in the past would not have these. Story 28. Clean running water, access to food, medicine, and education, just to mention a couple. Seeing the other side of the coin and the entitlement makes me sick. Travel to a developing nation and see how being upset that the store is out of your favorite creamer is a minor issue. At least you can walk into a store and buy food. Story 29. Driving your personal car instead of other means of transportation is very expensive. There are other ways to get around that are less polluting and less harmful to the environment. Story 30. Education. I enroll refugees in English as a second language classes. The number of women from Afghanistan who have told me they weren't allowed any education under the Taliban is horrendous. Story 31. As a Norwegian, these are some things I and my fellow Norwegians take for granted and forget that it's a luxury. Fresh, clean water from the tap I can drink, free healthcare, free education, low crime rate, and social security if you can't work. Lots more too. Story 32. Having a job, whether it be a six-figure corporate job or a minimum wage job at a fast food place, still beats having nothing. It's something to keep in mind if you have a bad day at work. Story 33. My clothes washer was out of order for a while, and I had to do a load at the laundromat. For $10, I got the largest machine there, and it said to put in 6 loads of clothes. I did. I put in 6 pods and some extra powdered soap. Clothes turned out great. My machine is fine now, but I like the idea of washing 6 loads of clothes at once. The cycle on my machine is 2 hours. The 6-loader was about 35 minutes. Story 34. Freedom of movement by having a powerful passport. You can be a wealthy person from a developing country and still go through all sorts of demeaning procedures just to get a visa to travel to places. Or you could be lucky enough to be a citizen of a country with a decent passport and just book a ticket to go where you want. Story 35. I mean, if you compare to a couple of hundred years ago, so many things. 1. Sugar, spices, and coffee were rare and expensive commodities. Owning a horse or carriage was a sign of wealth. Formal education was for the elite. Hot running water in your shower. Story 36. Any semblance of a retirement. In the centuries before, you worked while you had the ability and then hoped that your tribal knowledge was useful and that able-bodied people would help with your share. Story 37. I don't think a lot of people here know the difference between a luxury and a basic human right. Even if the basic human right isn't met by most people, it doesn't make it a luxury to have. It makes it a basic human right to fight for. Story 38. Having private space. Having space to study. Having equipment to cook. Having refrigeration to store food. Having a freezer to store food. Being able to afford, source, and finance spare food to store. Having your own clean bed. Having free access to vaccinations. Having free healthcare. Being able to own property, have autonomy over your body, being able to pursue your own ideals and career, having the freedom to express your own ideas, having choice over contraception, being able to express your own sexuality, being free to economically migrate, being able to swim. being taught to read, to develop health, digital, and system literacy, and having the equipment and finance to access the digital world. Story 39. You are aware you are playing right into the brainwashing of the rich elite by saying essential stuff like a roof, drinking water, and not dying of heat or cold is a luxury. This is common decency that is basic. Never let the rich tell you how good you have compared to the poor and disenfranchised. Story 40. Going through the comments, hardly any of these are luxuries, and most of the world has all of these except air conditioning. Much better answers would be the typical American basics, which are actually luxuries: big yards, cheap fuel, double-door refrigerators, clean tap water, air conditioning, sink grinders, multiple cars, closets. Story 41. Air travel. I was reading something the other day about how in France, my country, 11% of the population flies regularly. Off the top of my head, 2% flies several times a month, 9% several times a year, 21% of French people fly once or twice a year, 35% fly only once in a while, and 33% have never been on a plane, which is my case, actually. And we're a pretty rich country, too. There are countries where more people have never and never will get on a plane. In movies and shows, particularly American ones, it feels so casual to board some flight or another, be it internationally or just to another state, but that's actually a costly luxury in many ways, more than one. Story 42. Being born an American citizen. What other country in the world has millions of people worldwide willing to give up all they have and walk thousands of miles or cross oceans just to have a chance to enjoy what is literally given to a citizen at birth?